Welcome to the Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast where we discuss focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. I'm Melissa Atkins, the Training and Development Coordinator, and with me is Burke Warrington, the Training and Development Specialist. Today on the show, we are excited to have Stephen Burke and Michael Swenson. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to them so they can go ahead and introduce themselves a little bit further before we dive into today's topic.
Hey everyone, thank you for having us. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all and share some of our insights and things that we're doing in sustainability in the built environment. I'm Stephen Burke, Senior Director of Sustainability at Suffolk Construction, working with Mike, and my background over the last 15 years has started at the residential individual home scale and doing renovations and green retrofits in that space, and now transitioning through the design side of the industry and now managing sustainability at a construction firm and in the construction space for the last decade. And I think that's probably as much as anyone needs to know. And I'll pass it over to Mike to have him introduce himself.
Thanks, Steve, and wanted to echo Steve's sentiment. Really appreciate being on the podcast today. Thank you for having us. My name is Mike Swenson. I have a unique background where I started in architecture school, but never formally went into architecture. Worked at a sustainability consultancy for a bit, working on green building certification, energy modeling. Worked at Harvard, leading their green building services group, where we not only collaborated with the Office for Sustainability on policy and overarching goals for the university, but also serving our capital projects there. Spent some time in the design engineering industry, working with engineers to engineer highly efficient buildings, heat pumps, for example. Now working with Stephen on the contractor side to offer our clients technical services to help them meet their sustainability goals. Thanks again for having us.
Absolutely. So to kind of give everybody, our listeners, a little bit more background, we're all very excited for our 7th annual Renewable Energy and Sustainability Conference that's coming up January 27th, 28th, and 29th. So we are very excited because Suffolk Construction is going to be there represented as one of our Spark Chats during the conference. So they're going to be presenting there. You can look forward to hearing more from them. But they were willing to come on the podcast and kind of hype up and talk a little bit more about sustainable design. And they actually have a personal connection to us here working for the Seminole Tribe of Florida because Suffolk Construction did have a hand in building the glorious Guitar Hotel. So these two gentlemen have not personally worked on that project, so we can't get too much into the nitty-gritty, but we just want to talk to you guys a little bit about that connection to the Seminole Tribe of Florida, as well as what we can look forward to learning from you a bit more come the conference in January. So if you guys wanted to speak a bit to either of those.
Yeah, well, we were thinking that, we live very much in the details of sustainability in the built environment, and we're very good at making things super complicated for a general audience. So, like, we have 15 different definitions for what it is to be a net zero building. And we thought it might be helpful just to kind of define some of the criteria around which we talk about sustainability in the built environment, just to kind of expand the horizon for people as to how we spend our day-to-day and what's out there. And if you're ever involved in a building project, the types of things that you could ask about to advocate for a more sustainable approach, or trying to understand what the metrics are, how you measure these things. So I think at a very high level, one of the ways that we try to simplify it down is there's two really big focus areas that we tend to gravitate towards in sustainability and buildings in the built environment. And one is one that everybody's going to be familiar with, which is the energy that people use to operate a building. And we call that either operational carbon or just, carbon from building operations. And that's your utility bills and the amount of gas that you're using or the electricity that you're using. And it's easily measured, and it's also easy to create a business payback around it because there's cost associated with using energy, and the less that you use, the more you save. So I think that one will be pretty straightforward to people. The one that's been more on the scene more recently with sustainability is what we call embodied carbon. So it's essentially all of the other carbon associated with the building process of putting a building together. And in particular, construction materials are a big focus for us now. So certain materials have a very high carbon footprint, and in particular, concrete and steel are two of the biggest ones. And especially in the commercial construction space, where buildings are primarily built with concrete and steel, there's a lot of emphasis on how we kind of lower that carbon profile. And the reason for that is because that operational carbon that we just talked about, that happens gradually over time. So your use in one year will accumulate into your use the next year and build kind of over time. Whereas all of the carbon from all the materials that you use in a construction project to put a building together, all of that happens right now today. So if we have goals to get to carbon neutral by 2040, 2050, we really have to focus on those emissions of today, even though historically we haven't been paying a ton of attention to it. So I think it's helpful to put those things in context so we can kind of have a conversation about it and people have a level playing field of understanding what the main focus areas are. And then just zooming it out very broadly, the reason all of this is important is 40% of global greenhouse gases come from the building industry, both in that operational space and that embodied carbon space. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on that. And I'd say maybe two other kind of subtopics there that we could talk about are health and wellness. I know that's been a big focus for Mike, and prior to his time at Suffolk, working in detoxifying the supply chain, finding materials that are healthier for building occupants, healthier for the workers that are putting those building products in place. And then resiliency is a really big thing, especially in the area of Florida where you all are. There's a lot of risk from major storm impacts. I think we were just looking at this recently that in 2024, this year, already there's been $500 billion of storm associated damage. So, that's maybe the overarching thing above all of this is the cost. So tying it back to what does it cost up front? What are the long-term benefits and paybacks? And how do you avoid costs in the future? And that's an area where Mike really specializes through some of the tools that he focuses on and helps owners guide through that conversation. So we could stop there and get into that, or I could kind of kick it over to Mike to kind of talk about his approach to kind of that economic analysis to kind of blend the environmental piece with the financial piece.
I say go with the flow, and if you want to keep talking about it, that is more than fine with us.
Yeah, why don't you take over, Mike?
Thanks, Steve. Yes, so when we think about what things cost, oftentimes we think about first cost. What is that, gallon of milk cost at the supermarket, and that's it. But from a built environment perspective, what we often like to do is look at it from a long-term cost effectiveness. And oftentimes we use the terminology life cycle cost analysis to say, we're building in not only the first cost, but, how much is it going to take to operate my building? How much is it going to take the maintenance staff to maintain my building? Are there incentives from the utility or the federal government that we can incorporate into our analysis to help understand what the most cost-effective, sustainable solution is? And this applies across the board, not only to say energy efficiency measures, but as Steve mentioned, embodied carbon decisions around resiliency, especially as we think about, in Florida, flooding, and how do we harden our structures to combat those extreme weather events, and what are the decisions that we make today that could potentially offset significant costs if there is an event in the future. So that's really what we're hoping to quantify through that life cycle cost analysis, or LCA. And then how do we Steve also mentioned kind of the healthier materials part. That's a tougher thing to quantify too. It's not just a unit of energy, but we all know that there are chemicals that cause hazards. And I'll quote Dr. Joe Allen, who's at the Harvard School of Public Health. He coined a term, chemical whack-a-mole. there's a chemical in the industry, it's put into a product, and you knock that down and something very similar just pops right up and they just call it something else. And so I think our strategy and our responsibility in the built environment is really to take more of what I call a class approach, where we're looking at that whole class of chemicals that may be similar, and how do we work with our trade partners, work with our vendors, work with the supply chain in order to not only advocate for healthier materials in our projects, but also, prioritize those folks that have done the due diligence, that have looked at these chemicals and alternatives for healthier products at the end of the day to reduce those health impacts on folks.
Yeah, I can just one thing that Mike and I have talked about is we get the question, how much of this is happening and is real? And I think something you wouldn't know unless you're in our space is that if you go down to the local hardware store, or particularly like a Lowe's or a Home Depot, there are impacts from the products that are sold in those stores that are a trickle-down effect from the actions that we take in our industry to kind of clean up these products. So the paints that you buy, for example, they've been engineered to improve performance and lower the chemical content over the last couple decades, so that when you're applying it and when you're in the space immediately afterwards, you're not getting as much chemical exposure in the air that you're breathing, and those off-gassing chemicals kind of dissipate more quickly. And it's something that the consumer doesn't even have to ask for. It's just now become a standard product because it doesn't make sense for these manufacturers to make different product types for the commercial industry as it does for the residential industry. And another encouraging development there is with vinyl plank flooring, which is a pretty popular type of flooring in residential settings. Because of the efforts of our space in the commercial industry, again, at these local consumer retailers, they've most often are now selling products that remove the most chemically harmful components in there, which are called plasticizers, known as BPA. A lot of people might have seen like BPA-free baby bottles, and a lot of baby type products are now BPA-free. So they're carrying that over into flooring, and I think it's exciting to see the things that we're doing actually do have kind of this other side impact to what we're talking about.
No, that's absolutely incredible, especially to consider it being like the standards shifting overall in a way that's going to be, healthier for everybody involved. A lot of our listeners, obviously everybody in Indian country, but a lot of our listeners specifically work within Native American housing, whether that's directors of the housing program, whether that's maintenance staff who work on the properties, whether that's folks who are working on rehabbing units that are already built. What are some kind of like thoughts or maybe just kind of like encouragement as far as sustainable building goes that you would, want them to know if they were listening to this episode?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple stats that stand out. Well, really one in particular that we often use in our industry, which is people spend on average 90% of their time indoors, which is kind of mind-blowing when you put it into the context of years. So by the time you're 30, 27 years of your life will have been spent inside of a building. So definitely in line with the conversation that Mike and I were just having here with you all, is healthy materials really should be a consideration, but also, and Mike can talk about this as well, kind of the way that buildings are designed for ventilation and fresh air delivery, and energy use, of course. And I don't want to suck up too much of the oxygen and airtime, so maybe I'll kick that over to Mike to kind of dovetail his perspective on some of those focal points for the residential setting.
For sure. And whether you're facilities folks, responsible for buying materials for a particular property, or you're just a consumer and you're thinking, hey, looking around my house, what can I do to make smarter decisions? And at the end of the day, I think, and we were cognizant of this when I was at Harvard, you know, there's a sentiment that sustainability is more expensive. And we try to overcome that. And over time, that'll naturally play itself out, as we all become advocates for whether it's healthier materials or energy efficiency or what have you. If the consumer expresses a need, that'll create kind of a competition in the environment. But as those folks simple decisions, and Steve delved into it a little bit with BPA, but other classes of chemicals that we know, it costs money to put a lot of these chemicals into products. And so whether you're, hey, there's window treatments in a office building that, you may need to be replacing because they're old, flame retardants is a prevalent material in a lot of window treatments. That stems back to the times when there was a lot more prevalence of smoking indoors, and people, unfortunately falling asleep on mattresses, and there needing to be kind of a mitigation measure there. So that could be an example of, as a facilities member, being able to ask your vendor, hey, do you have an opportunity for us to avoid flame retardants? On the consumer side, same thing. If you're in housing, you're buying a new mattress, like I just bought a new mattress a few weeks ago. Flame retardants, it's something that's just, a legacy item. It's been included in there forever. And so again, you as a consumer to be able to ask, are there flame retardants in this? And there are options that are cost effective or no added cost. That could be another opportunity where you can not only act as an advocate, but also, create a healthier environment for yourself within your home.
Yeah, this is definitely an area where we can start to nerd out and get into the details, because you get into some of these chemicals that actually do have an immediate potential risk, like some of the antimicrobials and stain repellents and things like that there are surface coatings on fabrics and things that you would never know when you're buying it that they're there, but they're there for a performance factor. It's not that they don't do anything, but they also come with associated risks. And there are alternatives that don't have these options from major manufacturers, like with clothing, for example, H&M, or with furnishings, for example, IKEA. And depending on who it is, different manufacturers have different lines. So we don't want you to need to have a sustainability person like us in the conversation every time you're making a decision. So of course, if you trend towards more natural-based materials, that's a safer way to approach it. And the even more complicated layer that we won't get into, but we'll just tease you with, is that there are certain things that are environmentally benign when they're installed in your home, like PVC pipe, for example, or other PVC products. But the production of those materials is environmentally detrimental, often in environmental justice communities, and creating these legacy chemicals where if we can find a better alternative, we definitely want to take it. But that's where Mike and I come in to kind of do our work behind the scenes. But we won't overwhelm you with those types of considerations, because there are many, and there are many of them.
So I have one question just for my sanity. So you guys mentioned earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said 40% of the greenhouse gases are from just like building structures. Am I saying that correctly?
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
So that in itself is so stressful. That's almost half. And then you were talking about when you go into Home Depot, and I was just thinking, yeah, you're totally right about the paint. Like I remember the paint being so toxic, like you couldn't stay in the house once you painted. And are there like, how can you protect yourself? Because now I'm thinking, oh man, like my floors and my wall, and like, oh man, like do I need to be asking more questions? What questions do I ask? So not to give, I want to save some for the energy conference, but can you give us a little like something for my sanity? A little tips and advice of what we should be looking out for, or what not to overstress about and let fear kind of consume.
I have one, but I'll give Mike the opportunity to see if he's got anything up his sleeve.
That's okay. If you got something top of mind, go for it.
Yeah. One of the things that I have done that's been very enlightening, and again, this is just because I'm a nerd and I'm into this stuff and I like data, but you can buy a pretty reliable consumer grade air quality monitor for in the $200 range. And I have found that to be really, really useful for me specifically. So I noticed, for example, when I first started using it years ago, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment with my wife and 3 dogs, and we were in a small space. And the CO2 levels would frequently get very high very quickly if we didn't have some sort of window cracked or something like that. And then when we would turn the gas oven on or cook with a gas stovetop, the particulates in the air would go up significantly, as would the CO2 content. So knowing that using that gas burning appliance in a small space was impacting my health negatively, seeing that in real time helped me realize that there was some immediate changes I could make just by cracking a window and getting some more fresh air ventilation in there. I think that's one that if people have the means to do it, can really be informative about the air quality of your space. And I think once you see kind of that relationship between the amount of oxygen and the amount of carbon dioxide, that's a pretty good proxy overall for air quality in a space, regardless of the materials that you have around you. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Mike?
I guess just one note, kind of along that same lines. I think I recently got my house insulated. It was an older home. It didn't have insulation in it, and so we thought it would be positive, just for our bills to be able to do that. And so one of the things that still resonates with me is the installer said, I see you have gas, just be aware that because of the insulation, that it's a tighter home, but that means it's a tighter home with keeping in some of the toxins that Steve had mentioned. So, whenever I'm cooking now, always have a window open just to help kind of manage my own individual health within the home.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you. I am going to cook with the window open from now on. That is like a lifesaver. Thank you.
And I would also say it's sometimes ignorance is bliss. Like, we're not very fun at dinner parties. When we start talking about these things, people tend to kind of like slowly back away. It's I would say if I was a just average consumer, I would feel encouraged because a lot of information is so widespread now and so many people are paying attention to these types of things that manufacturers are slowly but surely increasing the amount of product offerings that are detoxified and moving in the right direction. So we'll eventually get there where I think the majority of products are clean and green. So just, have hope that things are going in the right direction.
Good to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
No, that's very reassuring. Is it going to be y'all two who present come January?
Just Mike. Just Mike.
Just Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mike, what are some of the just kind of bullet points of what we can look forward to hearing about from Suffolk in January?
Yeah, as we talked a lot about on the healthier materials side, I think there's a lot of advancement on the energy efficiency side that we're really excited about, and then just also the funding mechanisms for that have changed. Folks may be aware of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a regulation that had a major change probably just over 2 years ago, but it opened up a lot of capital for tribal communities in order to really fund what's been these expensive energy efficiency solutions like geothermal or solar for your home. And so to be able to unlock those opportunities, I think we want to try to get the word out because we talk with folks sometimes and we often get that roadblock of, it's too expensive. We've tried to get funding for this in the past and we haven't been able to because of XYZ. We deal with our nonprofits as well. They've, been conditioned to just not having that as an available funding stream. And so we're hoping to bring to light, not only that these things are available, but just the amount of impact. It's not just a pennies on the dollars. It does make a difference in terms of payback. So really trying to instill the technical aspects or the practical aspects of what's coming in the pipeline. I think also along that same lines, Suffolk here, we have a venture capital arm called Suffolk Tech, and they're really kind of the boots on the ground as to what's next in the industry. And so we're excited to I won't give away the secret sauce now, but a lot of those technologies that are startups coming in, whether it's healthier material solutions or lower embodied carbon solutions or energy efficiency solutions, there's some really cool stuff in the pipeline to help prove for a more sustainable future.
Yay, very cool. Well, we can't wait to hear the actual secret sauce come January. As y'all can tell, these gentlemen really, really know their stuff, and the folks at Suffolk Construction have been amazing. So you will get to hear even more delightful things about materials that are going to protect Mother Earth, as well as where you get the money so that you can use those in your building. So we hope that everybody will come join us at the 7th Annual Renewable Energy and Sustainability Conference come January 27th, 28th, 29th at the Seminole Hard Rock Guitar Hotel and Casino. We're all very excited. And thank you so much to Stephen and Michael for joining us today. We really learned a lot just in this brief time. Like I said, y'all really know your stuff. And we can't wait to learn more from you in January. Any final parting words from anybody?
Just thank you for having us. Looking forward to seeing you in January. I'm not presenting, but I'll be at the booth there, just kind of hanging out by myself. So if anyone wants to come by and talk shop, happy to do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, you'll hear Michael at the Spark Chat, and you can come bother Stephen at the table. And you can see all of us at the conference in January. All right, folks, that brings us to the close of today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Hoporenkv Native American podcast. I'm Burke Warrington, the Training and Development Specialist, and here with me is my co-host, Awista Atkins, the Training and Development Coordinator. We hope that you like our show. If you do, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Simplecast, and be sure to come back for more content.